Good evening and welcome to our virtual Committee of Adjustment meeting. Now, on the screen, you'll see members of our Committee of Adjustment. Behind the scenes, we have many staff members with us this evening who are working hard to make this evening's meeting possible. Our Secretary Treasurer is Lindsay Stamen, and our clerk is Ian Sullivan. And together, they are hosting the Zoom platform and running the meeting from behind the scenes. So you will be hearing them chime in from time to time, although you might not necessarily see them. Now, the agenda and the schedules for this evening's meeting are posted on Dash on the city's website. And if you don't have those documents and you'd like to follow along, please feel free to access them now. So we have 8 items on the agenda this evening, and I'd like to share with you the format that I'll be using as we navigate through each application. I'll start by introducing an applicant, and I'll give the applicant or their agent an opportunity to add anything further. If you have nothing further to add, then simply say so. Next, I'll turn over to the committee and I'll ask members of the committee I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions of either the applicant, the agent, or staff. And after that, we'll open the public portion of the meeting. Now, at that time, I'll invite you to raise your virtual hand in Zoom if you have any questions or you wish to make a comment in respect of an application. Now, if you do have a question or you wish to make a comment, please don't expect an immediate answer, because it's during this public portion of the meeting, we physically record the questions and the comments, and it's only after we close the public portion of the meeting will the questions and comments be addressed by the applicant, their agent, or staff. I'll be calling for public comments 3 times, and I'll give each individual a maximum of 5 minutes to address the committee. After I close the public portion of the meeting, I turn back to the applicant or staff to address the public comments, and then we go back to the committee. I'll ask them to make a motion. We will deliberate on the application and make an ultimate decision. And then we just rinse and we repeat. I'm going to be using the same format for every application this evening. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, if you have a personal interest in any particular application this evening and you'd like to receive written notice of tonight's decision, then please send an email with your name and address to our Secretary Treasurer, Lindsay Stamen. Her email address is lsthamann@cityofkingston.ca. Be sure to include your name, your address, and most importantly, the file number of the application, and then you'll be included on future mailouts. So I'll now call on Ian, our clerk, to confirm quorum. Ian?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I can confirm we do have quorum, with regrets from Jordan Takenos Levy. Joining us from staff this evening, we have James Barr, the Manager of Development Approvals. We have Tim Fisher, Planner. Jason Partridge, Planner. Megan Robidoux, Intermediate Planner. We have Lindsay Stamen, the Intermediate Planner and Secretary Treasurer. Eric O'Shea is also the Acting Deputy City Clerk, is meeting host this evening, and I am Ian Sullivan, the Committee Clerk. I can also confirm that currently we have 5 members of the public in the viewing gallery, along with the applicants and their associated members.
Very good. Thanks very much. So on that, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 5:33 p.m. and I'll refer you to the agenda. So committee members, I'm sure everybody has we've received an addendum late this afternoon. Have you all received that just by nodding your heads? Okay, we see that. So I'm going to call for a motion to approve the agenda with the addendum. All right, so moved by Vincent and seconded by Greg. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. All right, so next is the confirmation of the minutes from our May 16th meeting. Everybody's received them and had an opportunity to read them. So can I call for a motion to approve those minutes? So it's moved by Paul and seconded by Blaine. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Everybody shaking their head no, but I do have one. It's for 100 Napier Street. I'm working with the agent on another project, so I'll be removing myself from the meeting and asking the vice chair to take over the meeting. We have no delegations this evening, but as we saw in the addendum, we do have one request for deferral, item number 8C for Innovation Drive. So I just have a question. Is that a deferred with a particular date or deferred sine die? Perhaps James? Yeah, James.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. That is deferred until the July Committee of Adjustment meeting. Proper notice wasn't given under the Planning Act. The sign wasn't posted 10 days in advance, and we found this out a little too late. So we're requesting deferral of the application here today so that it can be heard on the July, I believe it's 16th, and Ian can correct me if I'm wrong, Committee of Adjustment date.
Okay. All right. So we'll need, I guess, a motion from the committee. So somebody to move that. So moved by Blaine and seconded by Greg. Any discussion? Okay, so all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. Okay, so we have that one deferral. We have no returning deferred items. So now we're on to our pieces of business, number 8A, which is an application. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, you have a question?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a piece of correspondence that's on page 203 of the package, the agenda package, and it's regarding property at 39 Elder Beck, and it's not listed on the agenda. And I'm just wondering, should we ensure that that's part of the agenda or not? I really wasn't clear.
Oh, well, that's actually a good point. Everybody, I know we've received that. That was listed under, it is actually, in fact, in the agenda for on correspondence, item number 11.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll have and I'm quite interested in that as well. So I'm glad you did bring that up, but I think we're covered there. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first piece of new business we have is an application for a minor variance, 1177 Bentley Terrace. So Lindsay, can I have you read that into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our first application tonight is for minor variance at 1177 Bentley Terrace. The file number associated with the application is D13014-2022, and Tim Fisher will give a presentation on behalf of the city for this application.
Great, thanks very much. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We have an application at 1177 Bentley Terrace. The applicant proposes to construct a 10.8 square meter addition to the rear of the single detached dwelling and construct a 37 square meter deck with stairs and landing to the rear of the dwelling. The variances that are being sought are only for the deck and the stairs. Next slide. So the subject property is located in an existing residential neighborhood and is developed with a partial 2-story single-family dwelling. And Highgate Creek is also abutting the rear property line. Next slide. So the property is designated residential and environmental protected area in the official plan and zoned residential type 1 or R1 zone in zoning bylaw number 7626. The property is also zoned UR1A in the new zoning bylaw number 2022-62. The final draft of the city's new zoning bylaw was approved by council at its meeting held on April 26, 2022. The application has been reviewed against both the current zoning bylaw as well as the new zoning bylaw. Next slide. For the variances requested, the deck, the maximum area of the deck itself, the applicant proposes to construct a 30 square meter elevated deck at the rear of the dwelling. And as a result of the elevated deck and lot grading, a 7 square meter 2-tiered stairway is proposed. Zoning bylaw 7626 includes the deck, stairs, and landings as part of the deck. Therefore, the total area of the deck is actually 37 square meters. So the variance that is being sought for here is a request of 7 square meters. And it's important to note that under the new zoning bylaw, no variances would be required, as it would comply with the maximum square meters, as the stairs have been removed from the definition of deck and under a separate provision. The floodplain setback, the variance is also requested to reduce the setback from a floodplain from 7.6 meters to 6.1 meters to recognize the closest point of the deck to the floodplain. The variance is not applied to the entirety of the deck. However, the variance will recognize the location of the deck. Next slide. Just like to note that the CRCA commented that they have no concerns, subject to obtaining a permit under OREG 148/06 from the Conservation Authority, and this would be addressed through the building permit application process. Again, through the new zoning bylaw, no variance would be required, as the definition of the floodplain has changed to high water mark. And in the calculation, this deck would actually comply with the high water mark setback. The proposed variances will only apply to the subject property and is not anticipated to have any negative impacts on the abutting residential uses to the north and south, or the EPA lands to the west. The requested variances are considered minor, as there are no anticipated negative off-site impacts. The proposed use is permitted within the zoning bylaw, and the proposal will comply with the provisions of the new zoning bylaw. The subject property drops in grade at the rear of the lot, which provides a walkout basement. The proposal maintains the existing single detached dwelling use and will not result in an increase of units or bedroom counts. The subject property will continue to function appropriately, as the driveway will be maintained from Bentley Terrace and a rear yard will be maintained. The existing means of egress and ingress from the dwelling are maintained, and the deck will provide safe outdoor amenity space, which will be accessed from the main level with safe access to the rear yard. The variance is desirable and appropriate use of the land and will be in line with the zoning bylaw provisions of zoning bylaw 2022-62. Next slide. Public consultation, public notice was mailed to all property owners within 60-meter radius of the properties. Signage was posted on site, and a courtesy ad was posted in the Kingston Whig Standard. To date, we have received no public comments or concerns. Next slide. So the requested variances maintain the general intent and purpose of both the both the official plan and zoning bylaw number 7626 and the provisions of zoning bylaw 2022-62. The proposal is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land, and the requested variances are minor in nature. Approval of this application will permit the construction of a rear deck to an existing single detached dwelling. The application is being recommended for approval, subject to the conditions attached as Exhibit A to report number COA 22050. I leave this in your hands and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks a lot, Tim. So at this point, can I please call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name? And if you could please give your address for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Cormac Trainer, and along with my wife, Heather Trainer, we are the applicants.
Thank you very much and welcome. Is there anything further you have to add to the application this evening, or does it stand on its own?
Yeah, nothing further to add, thank you.
Great. Okay, so committee members, do you have any questions of the applicant or staff? And I'm seeing none, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 1177 Bentley Terrace? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. I'll call a second time. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 1177 Bentley Terrace? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 1177 Bentley Terrace? Please raise your virtual hand. In Zoom, I see none, so I'll come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Paul and seconded by Blaine. Any discussion? So there's none. So all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great. So the next item on the agenda is for, looks like an application for minor variance for 295 Emerald Street. Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an application for minor variance, file number D13-021-2022 at 295 Emerald Street. Tim Fisher will also give the presentation for this application.
Okay, welcome back, Tim.
Hi, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. This application is for minor variance for 295 Emerald Street. The applicant is proposing to reduce the rear yard setback to construct a 10.2 square meter 3-season unheated room in place of an existing 10 square meter rear deck. Next slide, please. The subject property is developed with a bungalow with a single car garage fronting on Emerald Street. The property is located in a residential neighborhood developed with single detached dwellings. Next slide. So the property is designated residential in the official plan and zoned low density residential LDR1 zone in zoning bylaw 97-102. The property is also zoned urban residential 3 UR3B zone in the new City of Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62. And again, this application has been reviewed against both the current and the new zoning bylaw. Next slide. So the first variance under bylaw 97-102 is the minimum rear yard setback. As you can see, the requirement is 6 meters. The applicant is proposing 4.6 meters, and the variance requested is 1.4 meters. It is important to note here that a deck is permitted to be within this location. However, the 3-season sunroom is treated as living space. So therefore, it is part of the principal structure and therefore required to comply with the performance standards for the principal structure and not the deck provisions. And in zoning bylaw 2022-62, the bylaw requirements remain the same. And again, we're varying both provisions under the bylaws just to harmonize the proposed changes here. Again, the new zoning bylaw also requires the 3-season unheated room to be subject to the same provisions. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So the deck is highlighted in yellow, or sorry, where the deck is currently is highlighted in yellow. And as you can see, the proposed sunroom with the elevations on the left-hand side. So the subject property is developed with a 1-story single detached dwelling. The proposed 10.2 square meter 3-season sunroom is at the rear of the dwelling and will provide living space to the residential use. The variance is considered minor as the development is in keeping with the scale and design of the existing residential development in the neighborhood. The proposal is not anticipated to have any negative impacts on the abutting residential uses. The sunroom is located in the rear yard and will not be visible from the street. Therefore, it will have no impacts on the streetscape or character of the neighborhood. The proposal will not result in any new units or bedrooms. The rear yard, a rear yard is maintained for outdoor amenity space. The variance is only applied to the 3-season sunroom at the rear of the dwelling and not along the entire width of the lot. The variance is considered desirable and appropriate use of the land. Next slide, please. Public consultation, as per the Planning Act, public notice was mailed to all property owners within 60-meter radius of the property. Signage was posted on site and a courtesy ad was placed in the Kingston Wig Standard. To date, we have received no public comments or concerns. Next slide. The requested variance maintains the general intent and purpose of both the City of Kingston official plan and zoning bylaw number 97-102 and the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. The proposal is desirable for the appropriate development. As such, the proposed application meets all 4 tests under subsection 45(1) of the Planning Act, and the application is being recommended for approval subject to the conditions attached as Exhibit A to report number COA 22051. That's my conclusion. If you have any questions or concerns, I'm happy to answer.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim. At this point, I'd like to call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name. And if you could state your address for the record, please.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair and the committee members. My name is Syed Ahmed, and I just noticed that name on that as a participant is Andriana's. Actually, I'm the agent for this evening meeting, and I'm nothing else to add. Everything is very well explained and said, and I appreciate if we can get that application approved tonight.
Very good. Thanks, and thanks very much, and welcome. Okay, so committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? And none, so I'm seeing none, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 295 Emerald Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 295 Emerald Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, do we have any members or anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 295 Emerald Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I see none, so I'll now close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Blaine and seconded by Greg. Any discussion? And I see none. So all in favor, raise your physical hands. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, so our next application is an application for minor variance. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. This one is 8C, which has been deferred, Innovation Drive. So the next one after this is 2 Nina's Lane. So Lindsay, can I have you read that into the file, please? Oh.
Through you, Mr. Chair, 8D is an application for permission and minor variance at 2 Nina's Lane, file number D13-013-2022. Megan Robidoux will give the presentation for this application.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Megan.
Hey, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Megan Robidoux, and I am the planner who's been processing this application for permission and minor variance for the property known as 2 Nina's Lane. The purpose and effect of the application is to permit a new detached dwelling on the subject property. Next slide. The subject property is situated at the terminus of Nina's Lane, located north of Isle of Man Road. There are 4 existing dwellings on the subject property addressed as 2, 3, 8, and 18 Nina's Lane. The dwelling known as 8 Nina's Lane has recently been demolished, while 3 and 18 remain and are currently subject to landlord and tenant board proceedings disputing ownership. The property known as 2 Nina's Lane is proposed to be converted to a storage building. I want to note that while the city is well aware of the ongoing proceedings at the Landlord Tenant Board regarding the ownership of 3 and 18 Nina's Lane, the city does not have a role in these proceedings as it is a private dispute between private parties. So this application has been reviewed under the assumption that those dwellings known as 3 and 18 Nina's Lane may remain indefinitely. Next slide, please. The property is designated rural and environmental protection area in the official plan and is zoned limited service residential and open space in zoning bylaw 3274. The subject property is zoned entirely limited service residential under the new Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62. Next slide, please. The existing dwellings on the subject property were established prior to zoning bylaw 3274 coming into force and effect, and as a result are legal non-conforming and legal non-complying with respect to several provisions of the LSR zone. Permitted residential uses in the LSR zone include a detached single-family dwelling house and a seasonal dwelling house. Multiple detached dwelling houses are not a permitted use in the LSR zone, and as a result, a permission is required to allow for the alteration of the existing non-conforming use of the site for a total of 4 dwellings, down to a total of 3 dwellings. Next slide, please. In addition, to facilitate the construction of the proposed new dwelling house, the applicant is requesting a minor variance from section 511C of zoning bylaw 3274 lot development requirements to allow the LSR zone provisions to be measured from the lot boundary as opposed to the zone boundary. So when applied in this way as requested, the proposal would meet all provisions of the LSR zone, including lot coverage and setback requirements. The final draft of the city's new zoning bylaw was approved by council on April 26th of this year, as Tim mentioned, and is currently subject to appeal. And so as a result of that, this application has been reviewed against both the current zoning bylaw 3274 as well as the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. To facilitate the proposed new dwelling house, relief from section 423(1) of the new zoning bylaw, water separation distances is also required to permit a minimum separation distance from the high water mark of a water body to the proposed building of 16 meters, where a minimum of 30 meters is required. The CRCA has confirmed their support of this request, given that the proposal will be significantly further set back from the water than the existing development on the site. And in addition, I'll highlight that as a condition of approval, the applicant has agreed to submit a detailed planting plan for the renaturalization of the shoreline in the location of the dwelling at 8 Nina's Lane that has been demolished. Next slide, please. So as shown in the site plan here, the new dwelling is proposed to be located centrally on the subject property, a minimum of 16 meters from the high water mark as well as the lot boundary. And as mentioned, from a zoning perspective, the demolition of the existing structures known as 3 and 18 Nina's Lane would not be required in order to accommodate this proposal. Next slide. Pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, a notice of statutory public meeting was provided by advertisement in the form of signs posted adjacent to the subject property 10 days in advance of this meeting. In this particular instance, because the property is located at the end of a lengthy private laneway, the signs were posted at the top of that laneway where it intersects with the municipal road called Isle of Man Road, so that they were visible from a public road. And in addition, notices were sent by mail to 5 property owners within 60 meters of the subject property, and a courtesy notice was placed in the Kingston Whig Standard. I've received 2 phone inquiries regarding this application, and we've received 1 piece of written correspondence in support of the application, which is included in this evening's addendum. Next slide. The requested application for permission and minor variance is consistent with the general intent and purpose of both the City of Kingston official plan, zoning bylaw number 3274, and the new Kingston zoning bylaw 2022-62. The proposal is desirable for the appropriate development of the land and is not anticipated to result in adverse impacts to surrounding properties. Approval of this application will facilitate the replacement of an existing dwelling with a new detached dwelling on a residential lot within the rural area, and will bring the property closer into conformance with the zoning bylaw than it is today. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions regarding this application. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much, Megan. And just for a correction, I think there were 3 pieces of letters in 3 letters in support of a correspondence that we received in support of the application this evening that came in the addendum today, not just the one. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Bob Clark. I'm appearing on behalf of the applicant, Jerry Sutton.
Okay, thanks very much and welcome, Mr. Clark. Is there anything further you want to add to the application?
No, I think Megan has done a good job of explaining the application, but I am available to answer questions.
Great, thanks very much. So committee members, do you have any questions for Mr. Clark or staff? And I'm not seeing any, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 2 Nina's Lane? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I do see one in the gallery, Connie Morrow. If you could please state your full name and address for the record, please.
My name is Connie Morrow. I live at 18 Nina's Lane.
Okay, and yes, you wish to speak to this application?
Yes, my concern with the building of the new house, I do live at 18 Nina's Lane, me and my husband. The new house is, and the 3 Nina's Lane is where my sister lives. She's with me now here too. Our concern is this, with the size of the house, whether or not our houses need to be removed. Are they going to be forced to be ripped down? I think Megan answered that question, but, and getting to the houses. We've lived there like 35 plus years. So the destruction of the new house and how we would get past their home to my sister to get to her home and our home, how that would be affected. We own our house. We lease the land from Mr. Sutton. And that's our concerns. Like we've been there our whole life. It was our to live to forever house kind of thing. And our concern is whether or not the houses will be forced with this new construction to be removed or tore down and where that leaves us.
Okay. Very good. And anything else?
Did you have something, Heather?
Hi, my name is Heather Patterson. I live at 3 Nina's Lane. My concerns are very much the same as I myself have lived in the home that I own down there for almost 40 years. It was to be my forever home. And if those houses have to be torn down, my concern is where would I go? I'm on a pension. I can't afford the price of the apartments and housing in Kingston. And that's a major concern for me.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so do we have any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 2 Nina's Lane? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call is anybody with us this evening who wishes to speak to the application for 2 Nina's Lane, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. So I see none. So I'll come back to the applicant or staff or to address some of these comments. So Mr. Sutton, I see, recognize you.
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time and having us on Zoom tonight. Just in response to Mrs. Morrow and Mrs. Patterson's statements that they had made with regards to their dwellings, Mrs. Morrow has actually got an eviction notice that has been stayed at this time for the 30th of this month. We've been in a legal battle down there for about 4 years. Mrs. Patterson has not been there 40 years and Mrs. Morrow has not been there 36. Mrs. Patterson had only resided in the place just recently with her husband, Bobby Patterson, who passed away not too long ago. And these are seasonal cottages that they have actually squatted in. So we are looking, we've been in a 4-year landlord tenant board issue. They have decided and elected to try to claim ownership on the cottages, which we have no concern with at this time, but the land is ours. It's been very well known since we bought the land that we intended to build, and it's been nothing, in my own opinion, but harassment and delay tactics to try to hold us up to do what we had pleased to do, because this is my wife and my retirement home too as well. So I'll just leave it at that, there seems to be a lot of hearsay on what's what and who's who, and I don't really think that any other concerns have anything to do with the approval of this matter, and that'll be resolved at the LTB board.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Sutton. Mr. Clark, you had something to add?
I really don't. I agree with Mr. Sutton that the application that's before the Committee of Adjustment really doesn't deal with the issue of the cottages at 3 and 18 Nina's Lane. The application that you're faced with, or that you're dealing with this evening, has to do with the construction of the new residential building there, and the issue of the two cottages will be dealt with in another forum.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Clark. And Megan, you had a question, presumably to address the concerns of the two public members?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So as I mentioned, those ongoing proceedings of the landlord and tenant board, that's not something that the city has a role in. It is a private dispute between private parties. But I will note that and reiterate that from a zoning perspective and a land use planning perspective, the demolition of 3 and 18 Nina's Lane would not be required in order to accommodate this new proposed dwelling. If you look at Exhibit H of the staff report, it does illustrate the placement.
What page is that on, Megan?
Oh, just bear with me. I will tell you. So that would be page 94.
Okay, so page 94. Thanks. Yes.
So that exhibit provides a sketch of the proposed dwelling on the property in relation to these other existing dwellings, and illustrates that there's no overlap there and that there is sufficient setback provided between all of those structures to allow them to remain. So from the city's perspective, we've reviewed this application under the assumption that there is a possibility that those dwellings may continue to remain on the property.
Okay. All right, great. All right, so committee members, do you have any questions of the applicant or staff? I do actually have one. It's more just a clarification from I do believe it was Connie Morrow. Her question or concern was, she understands a home is going to be built here, but will she still have access to her home? And I think I'm just looking for clarification on that.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So the access of the property from the private laneway known as Nina's Lane will continue to the property. Perhaps the applicant can speak to the existing driveway on the property and how that might be altered through the proposal, but it would be the city's position that if those dwellings are to remain, that access would continue to be provided from the existing driveway. I'll also note that the application also recently underwent a holding removal as well, submitted by the owner. And the purpose of that was to enter into a private laneway agreement with the city to essentially formalize the existing access to the property from a private laneway and to recognize that. So in terms of the issue of access, that's worth noting as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Clark, you had something to add to that?
Yes, I do. As indicated, as Megan has indicated, the cottage number 2 is going to be turned into a storage facility, and access will be provided to that cottage. And through that access, the other 2 cottages will also have access, should that be the situation that continues to be relevant.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that clarification. Committee members, any further questions from the applicant or staff? Okay, so I'll come back to the committee now for a motion. So moved by Blaine and seconded by Somnath. All right, any discussion? None. So all in favor, raise your physical hand. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so the next file we have is for 100 Napier Street. I've declared pecuniary interest, so I'll be muting myself and getting out of here for this. So I'll turn the chair over to Vincent.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is an application for minor variance for 100 Napier Street. And Lindsay, can I have you introduce this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair, this is an application for minor variance and consent at 100 Napier Street. The file numbers are D13-026-2022 and D10-014-2022. I will turn it back over to Megan for the presentation.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an application for consent and minor variance for 100 Napier Street. The purpose and effect of the application is to sever an approximately 1,800 square meter lot on the south side of the subject property with approximately 34.9 meters of frontage on Napier Street. Next slide. The subject property is located on the west side of Napier Street and is currently home to the Kingston Lawn Bowling Club. The property is developed with a central one-story building with large lawns on either side. The subject property is located adjacent to single detached dwellings in all directions. The subject property is designated open space in the official plan and is zoned private open space under zoning bylaw 8499 and is similarly zoned general open space under the new Kingston zoning bylaw 2262. Next slide. The concept plan shown here illustrates the proposed severance on the south side of the property. While no new development is proposed as a part of these applications, it is proposed that the new parcel will continue to be utilized as private open space in accordance with the permitted uses in the existing zone. The concept plan shown here conceptually illustrates the use of the parcel as a private tennis court with 4 off-street parking spaces, which is a permitted use in the OS2 zone under both the existing zoning bylaw and the new Kingston zoning bylaw. Next slide. Minor variances are required to permit the proposed lot severance. The application has been reviewed against both the current zoning bylaw 8499 as well as the new zoning bylaw 2262. On the retained parcel and under zoning bylaw 8499, variances are required for side yard width, aggregate side yard width, and rear yard to recognize the existing configuration of the Kingston Lawn Bowling Club building on the subject property. Next slide. Variances are also required for minimum lot width and minimum lot area on both the retained and severed parcels under zoning bylaw 8499 to facilitate the proposed severance. Next slide. So these are those variances for lot width and area on the severed lot on the south side of the property. Under the new Kingston zoning bylaw, minimum lot widths and lot areas are not specified for the OS2 zone. So these particular variances are no longer required under the new zoning bylaw review. Next. Under the new zoning bylaw, 2 variances are required for the retained lands, one for rear setback and one for interior setback. To similarly recognize the existing configuration on the retained parcel as those variances required under zoning bylaw 8499. Next slide, please. Pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, a notice of statutory public meeting was provided by advertisement in the form of a sign on the subject property 14 days in advance of the meeting. In addition, notices were sent by mail to 55 property owners within 60 meters of the subject property, and a courtesy notice was placed in the Kingston Whig Standard. I received 1 phone inquiry and 2 pieces of written correspondence regarding this application, which are included in this evening's addendum. Next slide. The requested application for consent and minor variance is consistent with the general intent and purpose of both the City of Kingston official plan, zoning bylaw 8499, and the new Kingston zoning bylaw 2022-62. The proposal is desirable for the appropriate development of the land and is not anticipated to result in adverse impacts to the surrounding properties or neighborhood. Approval of this application will result in the creation of one new 1,800 square meter lot with approximately 34.9 meters of frontage on Napier Street. And I'll also note that the approval of these applications will not encumber the potential for consideration of any future land use changes on these severed or retained lots through a separate future Planning Act process. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. So now I'd like to call on the applicant and or agent to identify themselves by name and address for the record, please.
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair, my name's Alex Adams. I'm here representing the Kingston Lawn Bowling Club. The address is 20 Gore Street, Kingston.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add to the application?
Just one thing. I mean, Megan's done a very comprehensive overview there. Just the main purpose of this application is the club really wants to stay in the area, maintain their location on Napier Street. The two greens has just become a bit of an operational financial kind of liability to them. So they're just looking to sever it. Just to reiterate what Megan has said, there's no change to the proposed uses on the property. It will remain as an open space use. I did just have one request with respect to the recommended conditions. The request would be to remove condition 4 from both of the applications. This is a request for the archaeological assessment to be completed. The club is not looking to get out of it. They're just looking to defer this to a later Planning Act approval stage, being the site plan control agreement. This was previously discussed with staff and it was agreed upon that that could be the case. So I'm just not sure if it's just slipped in here by kind of just the standard template or what the situation is.
Okay, thank you. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? Seeing as none, I'll now open the public portion of the meeting and ask if there's any members of the public who wish to speak to the application of 100 Napier Street. Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. So I recognize Angie James. If you could state your name and address for the record.
Hi there, I'm actually Savas Francescos. I'm Angie James' husband. We both live together at 315 Willingdon Avenue. So we're backyard neighbors of the Lawn Bowling Club on the west side. They're great neighbors, so we'd like them to stay too, but we realize the situation that they're in. Oh, and then thanks to Megan for sending me a link when there were technical difficulties too. But I have a few. This is a new process to us, so I just want a few clarifications. So the variances with the rear and side setbacks, that is only for the retained portion, is that correct? For the severed parcel, the required setbacks are not changing, just the lot area and the lot width, is that correct?
So they're going to answer your question, all the questions after.
Okay, so I'll finish. Okay,
Yeah.
Yes. So if that's correct, I don't have too many concerns about that, because the concern was that why are we changing or reducing setbacks when the proposed, we don't know what the potential buyer is going to do with the property. And the other thing, just the feedback on, there was a public notice sent out, but there was no date for feedback on there. There was just a blank. It said by 4:30 on blank, and there was no concept sketch. So the neighbors in the area didn't really know what to expect. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see somebody else, Jason Bea. Can you state your name and your address for the record?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Joanna Dion. I am Jason Bea's wife. So we're here together on this call. We live at 307 Willingdon Avenue. So we're most of the rear yard of the tennis club. So we're on Willingdon Avenue. So I have a couple concerns about this. So the first one is, I understand that this is a proposed potential recreational use. This is not a confirmed use. So the variances that have been asked to be changed, I wouldn't really call them a minor variance. I'd call them quite a significant variance. Some are being decreased by 300, like 3 times. So for example, the rear variance, I think, was from 12 meters to 3 meters. So that would mean that I'm understand, like, to me, that seems like not really a minor variance against the back of our yard. I also have a question about how Megan specifically said that this does not, if these variances are allowed, it would not restrict a new owner who changes the use to a different use to keep those variances. So I think a very clear path of events would be if these variances are agreed to, an individual would purchase that with this sort of friendly idea of building a tennis court and 4 parking lots, which I don't think anyone would be against. And then they will have these big variances. They will change to a different zoning, and then they will build something that will essentially be right next to our backyard and our neighbor's backyard and all of the neighbors that run on Earl Street's backyards. So to me, this is quite an unstable situation, and that it is highly unpredictable what is going to happen to this lot. And I will argue that this lot is probably of significant value. I think it is unlikely that an individual who will purchase this lot, I think it's unlikely that that individual is not going to attempt to convert it into a much more lucrative investment, which is going to be either residential houses or, even worse, something commercial or taller in the air. So I think I think it's very unfair that it's being called a minor variance. I think this is a major variance. And I think that anyone on this call, either on the committee or listening in the community, who thinks this is going to stay a green space has got a lot of unicorns and rainbows in their world, because this is just, I think, very unlikely. And you know what? I would personally love if this was a tennis court and a parking lot for the tennis court. But if I had that, we're going to be that, I would be in agreement of the variance changes. But I don't think that it is fair to ask us to agree to these variances with absolutely no idea what is going to happen to this property. And I'm just going to hand it over to my husband for a second.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jason BA. I appreciate your guys' time and the committee's time on this. It's a bit confusing for us to look at this and see this plan that's been put forward. It does seem a little bit like a bit of an arbitrary green space sort of situation has been cooked up in order to kind of push this along through the city processes. It's a very particular plan that they put forward. I wonder if there is a buyer, or some sort of potential individual that's proposed this. There seems to be a lot of secrecy surrounding this, and that's a bit concerning. So I think that in terms of proposing what I would call these major variances to the outline of the property, we would not be in favor of those. That's all we have to say for now.
Okay, thank you. I'll call again if there's anybody who wants to speak for 100 Napier Street. Please raise your hand in Zoom. I'll call one final time. Is anybody here to speak on 100 Napier Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. Seeing as none, I will come back to the applicant to answer the questions that have been raised.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Vice Chair. The main concern I heard from both neighbours there was regarding the rear yard setback. Just to clarify from what Megan had presented, that's only applying to existing clubhouse. The variance is only, when you go through a planning application, you look to recognise existing situations which don't comply. So that rear yard is only applying to the clubhouse now. Obviously, it doesn't meet the rear yard, and it's 3 meters from the existing property line. So that That's the only reason for that variance. That 3 meters will not apply to any buildings on the severed lot. There's no buildings proposed on the severed lot, which is why, you know, a concept's not been put forward showing a building and nothing showing a, that 3 meters is not required for the severed lot. Those are the main concerns I heard, and if Megan's got anything else to add, please go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, so I'll just reiterate, Mr. Adams' point is correct in noting that the relief that's required for rear yard setback on the retained lands where the existing Kingston Lawn Bowling Clubhouse is to recognize the existing distance from that rear building wall to the rear lot line on the retained lands. So there would be no change there from how it exists today. And relief is not sought for any setbacks on the severed land. So if when a development proposal comes forward in the future for those lands, they would be required to meet all applicable setbacks for that severed parcel. In terms of, you know, some questions and concerns that were raised around the potential for residential or commercial uses to be established on that parcel in the future, I want to clarify that the parcel is both designated and zoned for open space uses in the official plan and in the zoning bylaw. So residential uses, commercial, retail uses are not permitted on that property as it exists today. If someone were to want to contemplate those types of uses on the property in the future, they would have to make applications for likely an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment, which would be a separate planning act, very public process through which those applications would be reviewed on their own merits. But that's not something that is proposed through this application. This application would facilitate the severance of the property to be used for any uses that are permitted as of right on the property today. So I hope that provides some clarity there. Please let me know if I haven't addressed any portion of those questions and comments.
Okay, I see the members in the galleries have their hands up. You can only speak once, so unfortunately, the public portion was closed. So now, committee members, do you have any questions for? Well, Alex, you had something to say?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just wondering if Megan and staff could just comment on my request regarding condition 4.
Go ahead, Megan.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yes, that was what I had raised my hand again to address. I would agree with Mr. Adams' comment that this was previously discussed and reviewed with Heritage Services staff, and it was determined that the requirement for archaeological assessment of the property could be deferred to a future site plan control application. And so as a result of that, we would agree that those conditions of approval for the consent and minor variance could be removed from the recommended conditions.
Okay, I saw Greg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment with respect to a little bit about what the member of the public had to say. I just wanted to say I live in the area, and it's very nice and neat and beautiful to see that property as it is right now, and I really appreciate it as it is right now, and that's the only comment that I wanted to add.
Okay, so I had a question about what Alex was talking about, removing number 4 as a condition. Is that something that we have to amend and vote on first? And I don't know if staff know or will answer.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. I believe that's a question for Committee Clerk Ian, so I'll turn that over to him for clarification.
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair, that is correct. You will have to move an amendment to change that recommendation and then vote on the amended motion.
Okay, so do we need to vote on the amendment first? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so is there, I just want to make sure, clarify that we all understand. So the minor variance is only for the existing structure, and if they want to build anything else or do anything else with the property, they would need minor variances for those things if they would need it as a separate thing, correct? Just to make sure everybody understands. Okay, so now I will see if a motion to amend and remove condition 4. Does anybody would like to move that? Paul, and seconded by Blaine. All in favor? That passes. Okay, so now can I have a motion to approve the whole thing as amended, moved by Somnath and seconded by Blaine. Any discussion? No, all in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. So Peter, you can come back now.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, Vincent. Okay, so the next application we have for this evening is for 991 Sydenham Road. And Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an application for minor variance at 991 Sydenham Road. The file number is D13-023-2022, and Jason Partridge will give the presentation for this application.
Thank you, and welcome, Jason.
How's it going? Through you, Mr. Chair, I could just ask the committee clerk to unlock my video. Awesome, thank you very much. Okay. So here we go. So this is an application for 991 Sydenham Road. It's a minor variance application. Next slide, please. The purpose and effect of the minor variance application is to request relief from the requirements regarding the minimum setback from the rear and interior lot lines to construct a one-story detached rear yard accessory building. The resulting new accessory building will be 91.42 square meters in size and complies with all minimum height and landscape open space requirements. Next slide, please. So the two variances that's being requested are the interior side width and the rear side width. So the first one, that requirement is 91 meters, and they're proposing 4.3, and the variance requested is 4.8 meters. So the rear yard setback requirement is 15.2, the proposed is 5.2, and the total variance requested is 10 meters even. So it's important to note with this property, it is a C3-15 zoning, and it's not subject to 2022-62, the new zoning bylaw. The provisions of C3-15 carry forward in them. So there's no request for any variances in the new zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So this is property is on the west side of Sydenham Road, just north of Princess Street. On the east side is Cataraqui Cemetery. Next slide, please. So on the bottom of the picture right here is Sydenham Road. It's kind of looking to the west, going to the north of this. So in blue, the accessory building is placed. Next slide, please. The requested variances maintain the general intent and purpose of both the City of Kingston official plan and zoning bylaw number 7626. The proposal is desirable and appropriate for the development or use of land, building, or structure, and the requested variance is minor in nature. As such, the proposed application meets all 4 tests under subsection 45(1) of the Planning Act, and the application is being recommended for approval, subject to the proposed conditions. Approval of the application will allow for the construction of a one-story accessory building within the rear yard of the property. Thank you very much. There was no public comments given as well.
Great, thanks very much, Jason. So can I now call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address for the record, please? Oh, I can hear a trickle of a noise. Can you repeat that?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
My name is Craig McCrae. I am the owner of the property.
Okay, Mr. McCrae, do you have anything further to add to the application?
This is a great now.
You'll have to speak closer and louder to the mic if you could.
All right, I think Kingston's done a great job.
Was that a no? I'm sorry, Mr. McCrae, we just can't hear you.
Unfortunately, I'm on the road and I'm at a rest stop.
Okay, so is there anything further you can add to the application, or are you ready to let it go where it is?
I'll let it go where it is.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'll turn it over to the committee. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And I'm seeing none. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 991 Sydenham Road? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 991 Sydenham Road? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 991 Sydenham Road. Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I see none. So I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Greg and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on this? So all in favor, raise your physical hand. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. McCrae. All right, the next application we have is for 442 Albert Street. So Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Up next is an application for permission and minor variance at 442 Albert Street. The file number is D13-018-2022, and I will give the presentation for this application.
All right, welcome.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. The purpose of this application at 442 Albert Street is to expand the existing daycare use into the existing detached accessory buildings on the site. This would result in an additional 21 daycare spaces. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the key map and the neighborhood context map for reference. The site is currently developed with a legal non-conforming daycare, and there are no residential units on the property. Next slide, please. So there are two elements to this application before us tonight. First, the applicant requires permission to expand the daycare use into the accessory buildings. This permission is sought both under the existing zoning bylaw 8499 and the new zoning bylaw 2262. The second element is a request for minor variance to reduce the required parking spaces from 4 spaces to 2 spaces. This variance is only required under the old zoning bylaw 8499. The proposed parking layout would comply with the new zoning bylaw, as the new zoning bylaw will only require 1 accessible parking space for this development. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing the proposed site plan. The 2 green areas are the existing accessory buildings, which will be converted for daycare use. The footprint and the height of these structures will not be increased. They are both legal non-conforming accessory buildings. The larger building at the back of the property is a 2-story coach house style structure. And the smaller green building on the bottom of the site plan is a 1-story garage currently. The yellow areas on the site plan are showing the 2 proposed parking spaces. The larger space is accessible and it includes the required aisle alongside of it. The smaller space is a standard parking space size from bylaw 8499. It was not possible to accommodate all 4 parking spaces on this site while maintaining conformance with other zoning provisions and while providing emergency service access to the rear building, just because of the way the existing buildings are placed on the lot and the restrictions from those buildings. And there's also a private easement that serves the property to the south, and that easement runs along the driveway and no parking spaces can be proposed within the easement. Next slide, please. So a sign was posted on the property, notice was mailed, and a courtesy ad appeared in the WIG standard. Since the finalization of this presentation, we have received 7 public comments. They were all included in the addendum for tonight's meeting. The comments were generally in support of the application, although some concerns were raised regarding staff parking and traffic on Albert Street. The minor variance for parking has been considered carefully by the planning department, and we feel that that parking reduction is appropriate based on the direction provided in the new zoning bylaw, where no parking would be required for this project aside from the 1 accessible parking space. And I'll also note that transportation services was circulated through our review process, and they expressed no concerns with this application and no concerns with any impacts that it might have on existing traffic on Albert Street. Next slide, please. So the planning department is recommending approval of this application subject to the conditions in Exhibit A, and I leave this in your hands, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks very much for that. So at this point, I'd like to call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a planner with FO10 Planning and Design. I am the planner representing the applicant. I am joined this evening by the applicant and owner, Ms. Annie Lee, as well.
Great, thanks very much and welcome. Is there anything further you wish to add to the application we have?
No, Mr. Chair, I have no further comments. I've had a chance to review the public comments. I've had a chance to review the staff report. I agree with the recommendation, but certainly if the committee or if any members of the public have any questions this evening, I'm happy to assist.
Great, thanks very much. So committee members, do you have any questions for Mr. Leclerc or for staff? And Paul, I see Paul's hand raised, so yes.
Did you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yes.
Hi, sorry. I just want staff to speak to parking on Albert Street. Is parking allowed for drop off and pick up along Albert Street? And is it on the side of the daycare or opposite the other side of the street? Thank you.
Good question.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There is a 5-minute parking drop-off zone directly in front of 442 Albert Street. It would hold approximately 2 cars.
Thank you.
Okay, and Vincent, you have a question?
Yeah, it's about those 2 5-minute parking zones. I think in some of the feedback from the letters, they mentioned maybe trying to have more. A few more added to help alleviate the parking situation for drop off. I'm assuming that's not something we can address here. There would have to be a request to the city, probably. I assume it's not a condition we could add, would it? Just out of curiosity.
James, do you want to?
I can jump in here. So through you, Chair. That is not something we can add tonight to its decision. That is a matter for transportation services to consider through any right-of-way changes they would make to the parking arrangement in the area. This area is already heavily regulated, and as Lindsay has noted, there is the 5-minute drop-off spot located on the west side of the street where all of the available street parking is signed for this area, and that can accommodate approximately 2 vehicles. There is also additional street parking available up the entire west side should spots be available for parents or persons or workers in order to be able to park in this general area. It is part of the commuter parking permit area, so persons who commute into the city can park through the residential neighborhood with the appropriate pass if they work in the general vicinity. This is also steps from one of the city's busiest bus stations at Albert and Princess Street. It does have some of the highest volumes in the city. And the bus station on the northeast side is currently under renovation with the new 10-story building that's going up there. It's going to be incorporated into there. And with the renovations to 484 Albert Street, which is the Princess Street United Church, that's also getting an upgraded and enhanced bus, what do you call those things? Bus stop with shelters associated with it. So there is a variety of transportation options available to the site in the central portion of the city. One last thing to note is that in some of the reports, there was a lot of support voiced for this application, with some caveats that were requesting that Albert Street be one-way directed southbound through this area. Transportation Services has not raised any concern with the ability of the transportation network in this area to absorb any additional traffic that may result from this. But there is a transportation study going on for this portion of Princess Street between Division Street all the way through kind of northwest to the Concession Bath Road intersection, looking at the available transportation options for it. So through that work, it may assess different transportation needs for the neighborhood. But if members of the public do have concerns or questions about how this transportation network would evolve over time, it would be advised that they contact Transportation Services and try and get involved in that project.
Okay, any other questions or comments from committee members? I actually do have one, and it's kind of along the same lines, and maybe James, perhaps you can address this. It's in reference specifically to the letter we received in the addendum from Dan Gale, and it does deal with parking. And I'll preface my comments by saying he's quite clear that he's very much in support of the application, and they just love the facility in the area. He speaks more from a safety perspective. That's at least how I interpreted the letter. And I guess his inference was or suggestion was perhaps to make that section of Albert Street a one-way, really, I think more to address safety. And I know that's beyond the purview of the committee, but I don't want him to think that his comments to the committee have gone unheard. What would the recommendation be to him? And what can we do with the letter we received to ensure that I think his recommendation is really valid. So how do we get it onto the proper desk?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And yeah, that's why I wanted to preface my comments about traffic in the area. I didn't want to color anybody's opinion on this by saying upright, I understand reading the letters that everyone is supportive of it, and there are concerns that are being raised. So what I will do is I will commit to forwarding Mr. Egan's letter off to Transportation Services personally to make sure that it lands at the appropriate desk as part of that work. And I will CC him on it so that he is aware that it has moved to the appropriate place for consideration.
That's perfect. That's great. Thanks very much, James. Okay, good. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, so I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 442 Albert Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom, and the chair recognizes Mary Purcell. Could you please state your full name and address for the record?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, so my name is Mary Purcell, and Dan Gale, who wrote the letter, is my husband. So
okay,
I also live at 419 Albert Street, across the street and down the block a little bit from the daycare. I too am in support of having more daycare spaces, and the daycare, generally speaking, is an excellent neighbor. The concern really is with the parking on Albert Street, and it's not just the daycare. Although the daycare use is intensifying quite substantially. So there's about an 85% increase in the number of staff and over 60% increase in the number of daycare spaces. Right now, people who are picking up and dropping off the children are parking in the 5-minute zone facing the wrong way on the street. They are parking on the side of the street where parking is not permitted. Quite frequently, someone just did a U-turn in the street, nearly hit me one time. So if people were parking properly on the street, I don't think that we would have an issue. But most of the spaces are often taken. The permit parking is very rarely enforced. So I went out Thursday just randomly during 1 and 2 when parking is only permitted by permit. So there was only 1 permit. There were 11 cars parked there with no permit, and there were 2 cars parked at expired meters. So as I say, it's very rare that bylaw enforcement comes around. In the winter time, I've lived here for 20 odd years. This is the first year that the city did not clear any snow on the west side of the street. Normally both sides are cleared once or twice a winter. People were parking in front of the church, and with the snow parking in front of the church, people were stopped at the stoplight, and it was absolutely impossible to travel southbound on Albert Street. So I contacted parking several times. Not much happened. I contacted the councillor in the area, Councillor Neal. Enforcement was stepped up, and it has been a lot better, but that was a very dangerous situation. The church property is intensifying, and it's going to intensify even further. As far as I can tell, there are no visitor spots for the church, and there's no parking in front of the church on Princess Street because there's a bike lane, and there's no parking in front of the church because the light's there and impedes traffic. So people are parking in the accessible space in front of the church. They're still parking in front of the church. They are parking across the sidewalk opposite the church. There's a lot of construction in the area, so there's a lot of traffic. There are a lot more students now living on Princess Street, as I'm sure you're aware. So there's a lot more traffic on Albert Street. And that includes scooters, longboards, motorized, non-motorized. So there's just a lot of activity on the street, and there are a lot of dangerous situations. So I guess the only point being that the situation now is not good. And I really don't think that an intensification of the daycare should be permitted until the city studies the parking and traffic flow on Albert Street. I'm sure there are lots of things that can be done. Probably making it one-way southbound for the block would be the most helpful. In the meantime, enforcing the permits, I think would be helpful as well. So that's really all I have to say, and hope that we can resolve the situation so that the daycare can expand and the parking and traffic flow doesn't get any worse on Albert Street.
Great. Thanks very much for your comments. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak to the application for 442 Albert Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 442 Albert Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I see none. So I'm going to close the public portion of the meeting and come back to staff or the applicant to address the comments that we've just heard. And James?
Yuko can sweep this one for me if I miss anything, but I just wanted to jump in here. My apologies, Mary Purcell. I did say, I think, Dale Egan rather than Dan Gill. I think I played a little bit of letter jumble in my brain. I apologize for that. So I will take Dan Gale's letter and forward that on to Transportation Services. The concerns in the letter are noted, as well as the interface with everything that's happening on the street. A lot of the matters that were raised are enforcement matters that don't necessarily affect land use, but it's not lost on staff that this is a central portion of the city, and there are nearby areas that are intensifying with the development that's happening on Princess Street to this daycare that's happening in the central portion. These are all services that are also needed to support a growing community. So staff in their review of this are trying to balance the growth of something that supports the community as well as its impact on it. And that's where we rely on the expertise of our transportation services staff as well, who have reviewed the application and haven't raised any concerns with it. But of the concerns of user behavior and interference with maybe typical driving patterns, we will forward that letter on to Transportation Services for their consideration. It might end up with bylaw enforcement as well, just to bring a bit of greater clarity as to what's happening in the area.
Good. Thanks very much for that. Okay, and Yuko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would simply add, and I appreciate Mr. Barr's comments in response to the questions, and I appreciate Ms. Purcell coming out and speaking this evening and providing those comments. I would just add 2 items in terms of the daycare. In terms of what the daycare is able to do to mitigate against any parking demand, any parking need, they are providing an additional 4 bicycle parking spaces on the site through site plan control to encourage alternative modes of transportation for their staff. They're also working with their staff to look at all other options as well for permit parking in the area, but also to encourage active transportation and use of public transit. So they'll be working with their staff and with the city to obtain bus passes and so forth. Anything that can help reduce the number of vehicles generated on the street here. And finally, from a timing perspective, I think that was sort of implicit in terms of the transportation study there. The daycare is seeking this expansion to fill an immediate need. There is a high demand for the types of spaces they're providing, special needs spaces, infant spaces as well. And they're looking to have those spaces available, I believe, in December. And there's some construction that needs to happen in the 2 accessory buildings in order for them to hit that timeline. So timing is a bit of the essence as it relates to the daycare advancing their proposal. So,
okay,
thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Okay, so I see no other comments I have here that need to be addressed. So I'll now turn it over to the committee for a motion. So moved by Blaine and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion? Yes, Vincent.
I want to mention that I think it's great that we need a lot of daycare spaces and all the good things you hear about this daycare, and I like how that it's accessible for walking. A lot of people mentioned that they can walk there without having to drive, and they like having it nearby. But I do hope that the city does look at this more closely for parking, and maybe adding more. Hopefully adding more 5-minute parking, and then looking at the issues and making sure that it's as safe as it can be. But I think it's a great idea. I just hope that because of this meeting and all the attention brought to it, that there'll hopefully be some more attention brought to that street.
Great, thanks for that. And I have to echo the same comments, which was why I was pushing to have Mr. Gale's letter. I thought it was thoughtfully written, and he had a lot of really good ideas in there that I would not have otherwise thought about. And to have it all prefaced by the whole concept that he really appreciates and approves of the daycare, I thought was really good, adds a lot of value to it. Greg, you have a comment?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. In no way am I excusing breaking the law when it comes to parking. But I just wanted to add a comment that I do recognize the safety issues. And with respect to a lot of the comments that the member from the public brought forward, thank you for that. But I just wanted to state that people do what people do when they park and they're dropping off their children and in busy streets and parking the opposite direction and all these sorts of things. I do see them in many other areas of the city when I'm around, And I just wanted to make a remark that I'm not excusing behavior, but it does seem that it is common for these types of instances to come up from time to time.
Okay, thanks for that. Committee members, any other discussion? No, so on that, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, raise your physical hand. And that's 1, 2, that would be unanimously carried. Thank you. And our final application this evening is an application for, a minor variance for 655 Princess Street. Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our last application for tonight is an application for minor variance at 655 Princess Street. The file number is D13-017-2022. And I'm also the planner assigned to this application, so I will move into the presentation.
Great, and welcome back.
Thank you. The purpose of this application is to renovate the ground floor of the existing building to add 3 new 1-bedroom residential units. Next slide, please. So here are the neighborhood context and key maps from the report. The site is currently developed with 144 residential units, and it's also known as the Foundry Building. Next slide, please. So the 3 new residential units will trigger 2 minor variances. The first variance is to increase the maximum number of dwelling units from 145 to 147 units. The second variance is to decrease the required parking ratio for residential parking spaces. The zone requires 0.75 spaces per unit, and the applicant has proposed 0.74 spaces per unit. The proposal complies with all other provisions of the zoning bylaw, including maximum density, required bicycle parking, and required amenity space. I'll also note that the exact same variances are requested under the new zoning bylaw 2262, as the site-specific zone that applies to this property is being carried forward into the new zoning bylaw exactly as is. Next slide, please. So here we have the proposed ground floor plan. The 3 new units in question, I've just circled in green there. The area where the units are proposed is currently underutilized amenity space and a small portion of commercial area. The proposal includes relocation of that amenity space to the basement, which will have a new gym added to it. And the orientation of this drawing, just for reference, has Princess Street along the left side and Victoria Street along the bottom. Next slide, please. So here we have the floor plan for the basement level. So this includes all of the underground parking as well as the proposed gym. There are actually no changes proposed to the number of parking spaces on this site. There is currently a total of 120 parking spaces. 110 of those are used for residential units, and the remaining 10 spaces serve the commercial units in the building. 148 bicycle parking spaces are proposed. That's 1 per unit, and they're also located in the basement here. And the new gym is proposed in the bottom left-hand corner of this drawing. Next slide, please. So a sign was posted on the property, notice was mailed out, and a courtesy ad appeared in the WIG Standard. No public comments have been received for this application. Next slide, please. The Planning Department is recommending approval of this application subject to the conditions in Exhibit A, and I leave this application in your hands, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks very much for that, Lindsay. Okay, so at this point, can I call on the applicant to identify yourself by name and address, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Mike Keene, and I'm a land use planner with FO10 Consultants located at 4 Cataraqui Street in Kingston, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Great. And is there anything further you wish to add to the application we have before us?
No, Mr. Chair. We are very appreciative of staff's work on this project and agree with their findings and recommendations to you tonight. Thank you.
Great. All right, thanks very much. So committee members, do you have any questions for Mr. Leclerc or staff? So Blaine. Wrong button. Oh, you're still muted, Blaine. No, you're still muted. Your mic is muted. No. Oh, okay. All right, committee member. Any other committee members you have questions? Yes, Vincent.
So my question is, so you mentioned, so the two new dwellings will be done at the lower level. Is that where the lighter colored brick is and the windows are right at the sidewalk? And you mentioned a basement. Is there a level lower than that, or is that technically the basement where those windows? And I'm just curious to, because in our documents, we didn't have the same picture that you just displayed. So I just want to make sure that I know exactly if those new dwellings are the ones that are at the street level, right at the sidewalk windows.
Right.
Just to make
sure.
I'm happy to respond unless the Secretary Treasurer would like to. I'll start. So through you, Mr. Chair, the 3 units are on the main floor, which is that elevation that you see from Princess Street. But these are internal units that look to the courtyard that's in the middle of the building. And there is a floor below that, which is the parking level. So with the elevation of the street, you're correct. As this building climbs Princess Street, that main floor does sink into that street level.
Okay, Vincent, yes.
So is it they're taking some of the commercial space from the front and then just chopping it and then making apartments behind there facing the courtyard? Is that what's happening, or?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually an internal space to the site that looks out to the courtyard. It is a little bit of amenity space and a little bit of commercial space that they have not been able to rent. So moving that amenity space below that front lobby to utilize an area that's not being used to make up for it. But these units aren't facing the street. They're fully inside that courtyard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And just to further that, Mike, do those units actually have egress into the courtyard?
They would have access into that courtyard and through that center of the building too.
Great. So none of these units are all of these units have natural light coming into them?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Okay. And nothing facing the street. That's the distinction, is you're not losing that commercial frontage. These are kind of like your back of house area within the building.
Very good. Thanks for that. Okay, committee members, any other questions? And Blaine, do you want to try your mic again? No, you're good? Okay, all right. Okay, we're good. All right, so I'll now open up the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public here wishing to speak to the application for 655 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 655 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 655 Princess Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Greg and seconded by Paul. Any discussion on this? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. All right, thanks very much. So moving on in our agenda, we have no notices of motion. Item number 10, there's other business. There is no other business. Item number 11 was a piece of correspondence we received from Roland Billings dated June 2nd, 2022 regarding 37 Ellerbeck Street. was that it I guess relates to an application that was dated in 2015. So James, do you want to speak to this, or I guess to start?
Through Chair, I can speak to this correspondence that we received. So this, I don't know how many members of committee were around at this point, but in 2015, this was an application for, I see Bladen raised his hand, so maybe he has some corporate knowledge on this as well, as he's been around for this approval. So this was a consent that was submitted to the city for approval that was zone compliant, so it didn't have any minor variances that went along with it. So when it was severed, they also created a right-of-way down the property lines to service both 39 and 37 Ellerbeck, because there was an existing dwelling there. So that would give access to the rear yard for additional parking spaces, because there is no ability to park in the front yard. And at that point, under our zoning bylaws, there was no ability to have front yard parking. It was approved in 2015. The consent was finalized, so the lot was created. So it was just subject to the applicable A zone category, which averages out the front yard, has an average building depth, has an almost 11-meter tall height. With the right-of-way that was there, it created the narrow passageway to get back to the rear. Since then, there have been several changes to our zoning bylaws. So we have had the introduction of second residential units for buildings as of right. So in 2015, when the application was severed, if you look at the A zone provisions, you have to have 370 square meters per unit on a lot. So one unit on a lot can have 370 square meters of lot. The second unit, which is because he allows for 2 family dwellings, would need an additional 370. So you're looking at like 700 and bad math at the end of the day, 20 or 740 for the lot. With the introduction of second residential units, minimum lot sizes and densities was removed, so they could have a second residential unit as of right. We also have introduced the ability to have front yard parking with specific considerations for areas across the city. That was done in 2019 when we updated driveways and parking. Fast forward to today, we have a building permit in. It's a single detached dwelling with a second residential unit with rear yard parking. So residents in the neighborhood raised concerns about the building that was there in terms of zone compliance and fit within the area. And when you look at the images of the building, it does look like a departure in terms of height for that residential neighborhood, because as we find across the city, certain zone regulations are in place, but buildings, historic or not, have not been built up to them. Think Reddendale, which is, have predominantly been 1.5 story buildings, maybe because they have a larger lots with bungalows on them, but really the zoning there allows for a larger 2-story building because it allows for a height of 10.7 meters. The same thing applies in this portion of the city. So when this property came in for development and the building started to go up, residents raised concern with zone compliance, and our director in planning, as well as the director of building, so the chief building official, have been out to the site to speak with the residents, and work is ongoing on that site. So we're actively looking at it for zone compliance and compliance with regulations under the building code.
Okay, so interesting. So the allegations, I guess, that have been raised in the letter, I guess they kind of concerned me as a member of the Committee of Adjustment. It seemed that, this was an application that had gone through the Committee of Adjustment and it was approved based on the terms and conditions and the recommendations at that time. But then it appears, there are at least 2 inferences in this letter that suggest that the applicant may have, on purpose or not, or accidentally, changed some of the conditions just because, and now they're kind of being, being shouted out on that. Where does this stand right now as far as compliance goes? The one issue deals with the width of the right of way. That seems to have changed. How can they do that?
Through you, Chair. So when the application went through Committee of Adjustment, it did have a wider right of way noted on the plans, and that was revised through the finalization of the reference plan for that project, noting that 2.7 meters was sufficient at the time for the width of a vehicle to traverse through there. So there was that change, and staff I was not around at the time, but staff who reviewed the application deemed it to be satisfactory for the purposes of access through the final consent work process. This is an interesting application. We have, as staff, not supported something similar to this in modern terms. I believe if anybody remembers the application for Macdonell,
I do.
It was one something Macdonell.
Yep.
This has echoes of that again. So, you know, what often constitutes good land use planning at one time might, you know, not further down the road, either given change in policy, change in direction, change in approach, or change in understanding. So can't say we would or would not support an application here like this today, but, you know, our zone regulations are being updated with the new zoning bylaw, which will look at things like front yard setback. We are scrapping average building depth and going with a static building depth. So, and that will actually apply from their required front yard setback. So it prevents people from moving a building further back into their front yard to have it project further into the rear yard, because that 18-meter static front yard setback will apply from the front. So no matter how far you build from the front lot line, you only have 18 meters from your required front yard setback. So the zone regulations that we're bringing forward will have a bit more, what's the word I want to look for here? It will have a bit more regularity to them than some of the zone provisions that we see today. But the concerns have been noted by staff from Mr. Billings, and we are going through the normal processes that we undertake when reviewing building plans, as well as reviewing when someone actually builds on the property, how in conformance it is with the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thanks for that. Committee members, do you have any questions about this? So just to clarify, where does it go from here then, James?
The applicants have a building permit that has been granted. It is under construction. So from here forward, we're just working on the implementation of that building permit in accordance with their approvals. If they are found to not be in conformance with the zoning bylaw, they have two options. So make it in conformance with the zoning bylaw or apply for a variance through the committee of adjustment to have something else considered. We have taken a position through correspondence that if they are not in conformance with the zoning bylaw, they have to be with this site.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I think it's important that, I mean, you hate to think about the whistleblowers and people that complain and such, but from a, you know, being on the committee, we look at these things very seriously. And when, you know, when we, you know, come up with a decision based on the information before us and, you know, a motion is made and it's passed, and then somebody for whatever reason changes terms and conditions down the road, we want to be sure that it's certainly in compliance with what the original intention was. So at least this isn't going to be swept under the rug and there's some attention given to it. So I think that's good. Yeah, Paul, you have a question or comment?
I just want to make sure, Mr. Chair, that this piece of correspondence gets responded to.
Okay.
And because it's addressed, it looks like it's to the mayor, so it will be coming from somebody other than the Committee of Adjustment, as I'm assuming.
Okay, yeah. So Ian?
Yes, I can confirm that item of correspondence was also sent forward to council. So it is on the council agenda for tomorrow's council meeting.
Thank you.
Good. And can I just request on that, Ian, to be copied on whatever the response is made? Because I think Paul is recommending, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're recommending that a response be made to it. And I'd like to know that the committee gets a copy of that if we could.
I certainly will forward anything that comes up with that.
Thanks very much. And James?
I can confirm that our directors have replied to that email since they have actually met with the complainants on site. So I can work with them to dig up that communication and provide it to committee if that is appropriate.
That's really good. Thanks very much. And Greg, I saw your hand was up. Sorry for missing you.
That's okay, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm just not sure. Will Mr. and Mrs. Billings be attending City Council? Do we know tomorrow night or not? Should we extend an invitation for them to come to a future meeting of ours to speak to us as a committee? If that's possible, that's all I have to say.
That's a good question. There's not a lot we can do as a committee, so I would hate to lead them, give them a false hope that by speaking to us that we can be an agent for change. I don't really think we can. I think my concern is just that as I've just said, when something happens after the fact, that I certainly would like to see some, a resolution to it anyway. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Ian, did you want to chime in on that as the clerk?
Just to confirm with what you said, Mr. Chair, this is out of the committee's depth at this point. It's now in council's.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Any other comments at all from or questions from committee? Okay, thanks for that. And if I don't know if Mr. or Roland and Susan Billings are with us, but thanks very much for the letter and bringing it to our attention. I do appreciate that, and as I know the committee does as well. Okay, so now the date of the next meeting is for July 18th at 5:30 p.m. Everybody sees that. So now we're just looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your hands. So that's unanimously carried. Meeting adjourned at 7:20 p.m. Thanks, everybody.